Hi, welcome to our channel, Programming of Mind, where we accelerate your knowledge with concise, from high-value book summaries. Let's begin. The ego and its illusion, understanding the false self. Throughout our lives, we are often taught to believe that we're defined by what we do, how we look, or how others perceive us. This idea of the self, or ego, plays a central role in our lives, but it's a construct, an illusion that we mistakenly take as reality. At its core, the ego thrives on identification with external factors, our achievements, our possessions, our status, and even our emotions. But beneath the surface, the ego is not who we really are. Let's start with a story to illustrate this point. A story of the ego, the identity trap. Matthew, a young man in his late 20s, had always been driven. He graduated from a prestigious university, landed a high-paying job at a tech company, and was quickly climbing the corporate ladder. To the outside world, Matthew seemed to have it all: money, success, and the admiration of his peers. But despite his outward accomplishments, Matthew felt empty inside. He spent his days feeling anxious, comparing himself to others, and constantly striving for more. One day, after a particularly grueling meeting, Matthew found himself in a quiet park, reflecting on his life. He asked himself a simple but profound question. Who am I without all of this? Without the title, the job, the possessions, who was he? At that moment, Matthew began to see the truth. His sense of self had been built on external validation, not on his true essence. The ego had convinced him that he was defined by his job, his achievements, and the approval of others. But this false self left him feeling disconnected from the deeper part of who he truly was. Matthew's story is a powerful reminder that our ego is a false identity that can keep us trapped in a cycle of constant striving, never feeling satisfied or fulfilled. The ego constantly tells us who we should be. It thrives on comparison and competition, always pushing us to be better, more successful, or more liked. It tells us that our worth is based on our achievements and what others think of us. However, this identity is a mask, a social construct, and it is far from who we truly are. The nature of the ego, how it shapes our reality. The ego is not inherently bad. It has a function in our lives, helping us navigate the material world and interact with others. But the problem arises when we identify too strongly with it. The ego gives us a sense of separateness. It creates boundaries between ourselves and others. It tells us that we are separate from the world around us, that we are distinct, isolated, and different. Take Sarah, a successful writer. She spent years crafting her career, writing best-selling novels, and gaining fame. But despite her success, Sarah never felt truly content. She always worried about how her next book would be received, about whether her fans would still love her, and about whether she would lose her place at the top. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her public persona, in the accolades and attention she received. One day, after a particularly harsh review of her latest book, Sarah realized something profound. She was not her books, not her public image, and not the accolades. She was simply a human being, experiencing life in all its ups and downs. The review didn't diminish her worth. It was just another fleeting moment in time. This realization marked the beginning of Sarah's shift away from the ego. She began to understand that her true self wasn't dependent on others' opinions, achievements, or the approval of the outside world. She was enough as she was, just being, not doing. Breaking free from the ego, living authentically. To break free from the grip of the ego, we must first become aware of it. Awareness is the key to understanding how the ego operates in our lives. Once we recognize that the ego is not our true self, we can begin to let go of its hold on us. This doesn't mean we stop functioning in the world or stop caring about things like success, relationships, or personal growth. It simply means we stop identifying with these things as our source of self-worth. When we realize that we are more than the roles we play or the labels we carry, we can begin to live more authentically. John, a retired engineer, experienced this shift later in life. For decades, John had identified as an engineer. His career had been his life, and his sense of self was tied to his job. But when he retired, he felt a deep sense of loss. Who was he without his job title? How would he define himself now? In his search for meaning, John began to explore new hobbies: painting, volunteering, and traveling. As he spent more time doing things that brought him joy without any pressure to perform, he realized that his true self wasn't defined by his career or accomplishments. He was simply a person experiencing life in a deeper, more connected way. John's story illustrates that when we let go of the need to define ourselves by external roles, we open ourselves up to the richness of life. We begin to live more freely, without the constraints of the ego's demands. The ego's role in fear and suffering. The ego not only creates a false sense of self, but it also generates fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being judged. All these fears stem from our identification with the ego. The ego's primary concern is survival. It will do whatever it can to protect itself. This is why we often feel anxious, insecure, or defensive when we feel threatened. But the truth is that these fears are not real. They're products of the ego's need to maintain control. Take Linda, a young woman in her 30s, who was always afraid of rejection. She worried about what people thought of her, whether she was good enough, and whether she would ever find love. Her fear held her back from being her true self, and she found herself constantly seeking approval from others. One day, Linda decided to take a step back and look at her fears. She realized that her anxiety was not about her true self, but about her ego's need for validation. She asked herself, what if I didn't need anyone's approval? What if I could just be myself, without the fear of judgment? This shift in perspective was liberating. Linda began to let go of her need for validation, and in doing so, she found more peace and confidence within herself. She started to build deeper, more authentic relationships because she was no longer driven by fear or the need to protect her ego. The ego and relationships, finding true connection. The ego also plays a significant role in our relationships. We often enter relationships with a need to win, to prove our worth, or to get something from the other person. These relationships are based on expectations, conditions, and the ego's desire to feel validated. But true connection comes when we let go of these expectations and simply show up as we are. When we stop playing roles and masks, we allow for authentic connection. Take the relationship between Tom and Kate, a married couple who had been together for years. Early in their relationship, both had been focused on their own needs, their desires, their insecurities, their egos. But over time, they began to shift. They realized that their love for each other wasn't about fulfilling their individual egos, but about truly being present with each other. They stopped trying to win in arguments or compete for attention. Instead, they learned to listen deeply, to accept each other without conditions, and to be vulnerable. This led to a deeper, more intimate connection that transcended the ego's need for approval or validation. Tom and Kate's story highlights how letting go of the ego can transform relationships. True love and connection come not from the desire to get something from others, but from the willingness to show up fully and authentically. Thank you for listening, and please like the video and subscribe for more great upcoming content that will put you in top 1% people in the world.